Yeah, I didn't either. It conflicted with my Chumash Chaburis, Chumash Chabur, our Zoom Chumash Chabur.
Well, okay, so let's see the Haley Gemara over here. So we discussed yesterday two shatim in our Mishnah. Basil had a chomer, and Basil's chomer was that if an egg was laid on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to use it on Yom Tov. And the question is why? So first the Gemara wanted to know the chicken that it came from. Was it a chicken that was destined to create eggs? And then you would say that the egg that comes out of it would be muksa. The problem that the Gemara had with it being muksa was because then why would Beis Shammai argue? So the Gemara wanted to say that it's totally in Beis Shammai and Reb Shimon, and Reb Nachman wanted to say that although Beis Hillel holds of muksa on Yom Tov, on Shabbos we have a Stam Mishnah that says there is no din muksa. So on the tzad that it was muksa, it's only there's only a din muksa according to Basil, according to Rebbe on Yom Tov, and the reason why they made the din muksa on Yom Tov is to buttress the Yom Tov because Yom Tov isn't so chomer, and we're afraid people will disrespect Yom Tov. And according to and on Shabbos, being that Shabbos is severe, we didn't have the din muksa. The only problem that the Gemara had with Reb Nachman Shita was according to Reb Nachman Shita, why is our Mishnah discussing only the egg? Why isn't our Mishnah discussing the chicken as well? Because the chicken is also muksa. So the same reason why the egg is a muksa, the chicken is a muksa. So the Mishnah should have said the chicken and the egg together are muksa. That was the difficulty that the Gemara had with Reb Nachman Shita. So because of that, Gemara Bensi. And that's why Rabbah suggested a second shot. And Rabbah's second shot was that we're not speaking about a muksa. We're speaking about a chicken that was made lachila. So therefore, there's no question of muksa here at all. The question here is a new isser of hachana, and that is the Yom Tov Sudas. The Shabbos Sudas is a mitzvah in the Torah says vechinu. Shabbos Sudas, Yom Tov Sudas must be prepared on the day of Choil that precedes them. And therefore, if Yom Tov came out on Sunday, or if Yom Tov came out on Friday, and therefore Shabbos is the day after Yom Tov, then the Suda that you're going to have was prepared the day before, because an egg, the day before it hatches, it solidifies, it continues to progress in its growth. So therefore it's called hachana. Rashi also tells us, oy bezoi, every Sunday, how could you eat an egg that was laid? It was prepared on Shabbos. So there's even worse. You're making Shabbos l'choil. So Rashi, on Sunday, there is no special rule. There's no special rule on Sunday that your sudas can't be prepared before. So therefore, there's no restriction. Rashi, the sudas aren't so choshev that they have to be prepared before. So it's only a suda on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, okay, so that explains why an egg that was laid on a Yom Tov that came out on Sunday would be a problem because it was prepared the day before. But what if it's a regular Yom Tov and there was no Shabbos before it? Why can't you use the egg on those days? And that the Gemara says there's a gzeira. There's a gzeira if you use an egg that was laid on the first day of Yom Tov, you might not realize a year where the first day of Yom Tov is Sunday, you might also use the egg then, and therefore we don't let you use the egg. So those are the two pshatim so far. Muksa, which is Reb Nachman, and Hachana, which is Rabbah. According to Reb Nachman, we're talking about a chicken that was going to be used to lay eggs, not to be eaten. And according to Rabbah, we were talking about a chicken that was going to be used to be eaten anyway, and therefore there's no issue of the status. Now, Rabbi Yosef wants to offer another shot. Rabbi Yosef Amar, Gzeira mishum peres hanoifim. The reason why you're not allowed to eat this egg is because there's something called peres hanoifim. If pears fall off a tree on Shabbos, you should be allowed to use them, because what's the problem? you're not tearing anything off the tree. You're eating a pears. But we make a gzera by pears hanoshrin that you're not allowed to use those pears, because if you use those pears, you might also climb up the tree and cut. You might be toilish more pears. And because of that, we don't allow. So I'm Rabbi Yosy, gzera mishum pears hanoshrin. Just like pears that fall off a tree, we don't let you use. Pears that fell off a tree on Shabbos or Yom Tov, we don't let you use. So too, an egg that's laid on Yom Tov, we don't let you use, because if you do use it, we're afraid you'll also cut pears off a tree. Amar Abaye, so Frek Abaye, this is a little bit of a stretch. Pears are noishrin time of mind. Why is it that Chazal said you're not allowed to use pears on Shabbos and Yom Tov if they fell off that day? Gzeira shemiyalav yitlash, because we're afraid that you'll say, I like this apple, let me go get another one, and you'll rip it off a tree. And that's a deraisa. That's koitzer, Rashi says. So he gufa gzera. If the only reason why you're not allowed to use pears that you find on the ground is because of gzera, you might tear off another apple. So now we're going to extend it further. The nigzer gzera legzera. The reason why you can't use those pears is because of the gzera. So and then we're going to make another gzera. Don't eat eggs because you might take an apple. The whole apple is only also to use because of the gzera. And for the Gemara, and this is a huge yisoid all over Shas, that kula chad gzeri. When they made the gzera, when they originally established the gzera, they didn't only make the gzera on fruit that you find on the ground, and then later on they said, oh, if people use eggs, they might also use fruit, and then they extended the gzera. No, once they saw that there's a concern that somebody might climb up a tree and cut off an apple, they said, let's outlaw anything even remotely similar to it. So of course, if you find a fruit lying on the ground that fell off on Shabbos, of course that you cannot take. But even an egg that was laid on Shabbos, we're not going to let you use, or an egg that was laid on Yom Tov, we're not going to let you use, because we want to make sure that you stay far, far away from cutting any fruit off a tree.
So isn't it weird that a Masechta starts with the Gezeres Rabbanon rather than getting into first the Deraisis, and secondly, we should get into the Rabbanons?
So you're asking a very good kasha, because you're actually using a wedge in between these different mafarshim, because according to Rabbah, it was Daraisa. The Vehechinu Rashi's Beferish, from here you see Muksha Daraisa. According to Rab Nachman, we were learning also it's going to be Daraisa. Now, according to Yosy, according to Rab Yosef, he's explaining the Mishnah using an issue the Rabbanon.
Right.
In Chanami. But we learned something. I remember once learning a Mishnah, and the Gemara says, why did it start off with this? He says, I did that. He was learning from the drasha chavivale. Right? I did that. So sometimes if it's a Rabban Chiddush, it's a special chavivas. But I'm happy that you asked the question, because it could be even this is a deraisa. And let's see why. If you think of it, we're on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, aren't you allowed to do malachas for Eichel Nefesh?
Sure.
Why can't you pick an apple off a tree on Yom Tov? Why can't you pick an apple off a tree on Yom Tov?
I
So
was
there's a
thinking
very,
that
very
too.
important toisus. So let's see toisus over here. This is a very, very important toisus. So let me see where we have it over here. Let's see where we are. It's towards the bottom of toisus. It's a very, very important toisus here. Okay, here we are. Okay, here we are. Ach tema. So I'm halfway down in the middle level lines. Tosfos says ach tema. Ach tema. My shema yalav yitlash. What type of concern is it that on Yom Tif you might cut an apple off a tree? Afilu lechatchila mutter litlash. Even lechatchila, you're allowed to cut an apple off a tree on Yom Tif. The ha'ochel nefesh mutter. So why is there a problem here at all? The gam kosher lekamontanan sodin dogin min abibrim b'Yom Tif. You're actually allowed to go fishing on Yom Tif. V'amai ha'ochel nefeshu. I'm sorry, I read it. I missed a word. Ain't it sodin dogin min abibrim b'Yom Tif? You're not allowed to go fishing on Yom Tif. I was so excited for a second. V'amai.
That's an important word. Yeah.
You think, yeah. I'm what's called a snowflake. So just like today, they're not going to say beya, not beitza, because it's colloquially not used in such a nice way. So the word ein is a very painful word for a snowflake. So we don't use that. So ein tzadin dagman avrim b'yomtiv hamai ha'oichel nefeshu. It's oichel nefesh. The ein loimer. So Tosha says, don't suggest the chol davar sheyochel la'asoyse me'erev yomtiv osher la'asoyse b'yomtiv atzmai. Anything that you could have done on the erev yomtiv, it's osher to do on yomtiv. Ki lo yis'avid lay me'erev yomtiv if you didn't do it. Don't say that's the reason. Although the Rambam actually does lean this way. The Hamrinon, hu v'loy machshir. It says hu v'loy machshir, pirish oichel nefesh. Oichel nefesh itself, v'loy machshirov, can go in the second shpud. If I want to barbecue on Yom Tov, I am allowed to. But what if I don't have a good spit? So I take a piece of metal and I form it into a spit. I file down the edge to make a point. That you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. If you don't, lachem l'chol tzarchechem. If you don't, you can do anything. And you have who to asher machshirin she'efshir l'saknon me'erev Yom Tov. So only machshirin that you could have done erev Yom Tov are going to be awesome. Alma davka b'machshirin yesh chilek ben efshir la'asoyse me'erev Yom Tov ben efshir. Machshir echol nefesh, like preparing the spit for your barbecue, fixing your barbecue. That there's a chilek in the Gemara between if you could have done it before Yom Tov or not. But the actual cooking process, kula alma moide, everybody's moide, ta'afilu efshir la'asoyse me'erev Yom Tov. Even if you could have baked and cooked before Yom Tov, muter la'asoyse b'Yom Tov, right? Even if you could cook erev Yom Tov, you are allowed to cook on Yom Tov. So back to our question, why is it usher here to pull an apple off a tree on Yom Tov? Why aren't you allowed to go fishing on Yom Tov? Because how do you know what you're going to catch? Sure, if you catch a kosher fish, it's tzarech Yom Tov. But if you catch a non-kosher fish, then you did a malacha that was not tzarech Yom Tov. I don't like this shot because that wouldn't be a problem either. Them can't have a malacha shein shvicha legufa. The muteris. Then it would be a malacha shein shvicha legufa, which is muter anyway. So we have a problem. Why is it that you're not allowed to pick an apple off a tree on Shabbos? Okay, Pirush Rabbeinu in the Sanal Mikinain, the Yerushalmi Yesh. This is a Moyerdika Yosoid. The Yerushalmi Yesh. It says, Ach Asher Yoichal L'chol Nefesh. We're talking about Yom Tov in the Torah says, what's mutter? Things that are Oichal Nefesh. The Samachle, and right beside it, it says, Shmartem as a matzos, referring to the matzos on Pesach. So we learn, Oisa Malachos, Shemishimur Ve'elach, the Malachos that are from the point that you have to start watching the dough from becoming chametzik, and that's after you mix the flour with the water. I know we're makbid and shmur mishas ksira, but mikadin, the worry has to be once you mix the flour with the water. Once you mix the flour with the water, that's when you have to be careful. That's when it can become chametz. Those are the only malachas. Hey mutarish would be mutar on Yom Tov. The hainu milisha ve'elach. Avol shar malachas, but other malachas they mikodim lechein. Anything before the lisha, asurim are going to be also. So if we could create a rule for demarcation, we could say any activities that are done in the kitchen would be allowed. Any activities, even towards the production of food, that are done in the field, that are done in industry, those are not allowed on Yom Tov. And it's a deraisa, Zaktosis, we're learning it from a pasuk, based on the Yerushalmi. But I'll call upon you have a murdik Yisrael here in Tosis. And this we should all know. Every Yom Tov, what's mutter, what's usher? If oichel nefesh is mutter, why can't I drive to the store with my car and buy food? Why can't I go to the supermarket on Yom Tov? The teretz of Tosis, the only thing that's allowed is a deraisa, is things that are milish ve'elach, which means things that are done in the kitchen, but not things that are done out of the kitchen. That's a deraisa. The Rambam actually says not like touches. The Rambam learns that the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan learns that be'etzem midaraisa, it's mutter to get into your car and go to the supermarket on Shabbos. But what you're not allowed to do is midarbanan. He said midarbanan they answered anything that's not in the kitchen. So they're not arguing about the Rambam and Tosh aren't arguing about what's mutter and what's usher. They're just arguing about why it's usher. And the Rambam says it's usher midarbanan. They're a geyser because, and this is a little bit chauvinistic, because the Rambam, if we were able to do all those things in preparing, well, then we wouldn't rest on Yom Tov. We would be going shopping. We would be building barbecues. So that you're not allowed to do. But cooking, what your wife does, that you can do on Yom Tov. But that's what Rambam says. There wouldn't be a rest. There wouldn't be a rest on Yom Tov if we were able to do all of these machshir. That's why it stops over there. So according to Tosfos, it's also with the Raisa to do machshir eichel nefesh, or I'm sorry, even eichel nefesh, but things that are not done in the kitchen. According to the Rambam, it's with Rabbanan. And then there's a hybrid shita from the Rashba, which is a huge chiddush. And the Rashba says that the Torah, I don't remember which words in the Torah he's being medayik from, but he's medayik from the words in the Torah that says you have to refrain from halachas avoda, and the Rashba says masru l'chachamim. The Torah gave it over to the chachamim to identify what's mutter and what's asur. So the Rabbanan are deciding, similar to the way the Rambam learns, but once the Rabbanan decide, it's not a gzeret Rabbanan, it's actually defining the Dairaisa. That's how the Rashba learns. Now the Ran actually has a shaila later on, I think by Daf Chaf Gimel, the Ran has a shaila. What is this reason why? What is the reason why you're allowed to do oichal nefesh on Yom Tov? Is it because it's hutcha or it's hutra? We know the difference between hutcha and hutra is hutcha means it's in constant mutter, and hutra means because we were matter. So you might be able to say that could be that's told in the Rambam and the Tosfos. The Rambam learns that everything's mutter, so maybe it would be a hutra, and Tosfos learns it's only hutcha, so only the things that are directly relevant to the kitchen would be mutter. Then there's a shaila. Let's go weiter. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So the bottom line here is Gzer Shem Yalav Yitlosh. There's an isser to do things that aren't done in the kitchen, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to pick a fruit off a tree on Yom Tov. And when they made a Gzer to extend that to even fruit on the tree, they also said even eggs that were laid on Shabbos and Yom Tov would not be able to be used because it's Kula Chad Gzer. So this is a Rabbanan, like David spoke out. So it still is a Rabbanan. Rabbi Yitzchak had another option as to how to learn. He learned once again that there's not a question of muksa here. It's also a Rabbanan. It's Gzer Mishum Mashkim Shazofu. There's a Gzer of Mashkim Shazofu. Rashi says that there's a Gzer. The halacha is if you have grapes in a basket and juice oozes out of those grapes. So the halacha is you didn't squeeze it, so technically there's nothing wrong with it. But we're afraid if we let you drink that juice, you might squeeze the grapes. That's an isser of dosh. And therefore, a mafarik is a question what that isser is. But Al-Kopam is a deraisa to squeeze grapes for their juice. And therefore, we don't let you drink the juice even if it came out naturally. So an egg being laid is similar to juice that's extracted from fruit, and therefore it will be us. So we have the same spiel. Amalei Abaye. Mashkin shazavu taimamai, gzer shem yischati, gzer shem yischat, shem yischat. He gufa gzera, anan nekum, the mixer gzera gzera. We're going to now extend that gzera to eggs that were laid on Yom Tov. Zok to Gemara, no, kula chad gzera. It was all one gzera. It was made at the same time. So now we have our four sheetas. Chicken and the fruit have the gzera. Yes, the egg and the fruit. No. The egg is the juice. Correct. The egg's going to be also. The chicken's going to be mutter. The chicken is like the fruit. It's like going there. The chicken is just like the fruit. Like the chicken is like the fruit. So you're saying it's a little bit of a stretch. So I'm happy you brought that up because the Gemara now is going to say, okay, we have four different terutzim to explain our mission. We have Rab Nachman that it's muksa. We have Rabbah that it's hachana, which are deraisa, and then we have Rabbi Yosef that it's gzeira, and we have Rabbi Yitzchak that it's gzeira. And the Gemara is going to know why do they argue with each other. So one of the svaros is going to be exactly what you said. How can you compare a chicken to a juice, right? So that's a good point because the Gemara asks. Oh, that's what I forgot to mention earlier. What I forgot to mention earlier is this gzeira of mashkin shazavu is not by any fruit. It's only, of course, by fruit that normally are juiced. So in the times of the Gemara, the only fruit that they squeezed for juice were grapes and olives. But anything else they didn't. Tusim v'rimonim are something that aren't normally squeezed. But nowadays, but nowadays, we actually juice a lot more things. So a lot more things would have the gzeira mishumashkin shazavu nowadays.
You never juice a chicken.
That's right. These are all very good questions. That's right. That's a very good question. So we'll see that soon. There's also even the shaila of Sami Yalav Yitlash. There are those who hold that it doesn't apply to any type of fruit. It only applies to sweet fruit that you have a geschmack in. But it might not apply to carrots. It might apply to sweet fruit, but maybe not to carrots and spinach. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. No, there's two different things I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the juice issue now. I'm talking about if finding food on the floor you're not allowed to use because you might pick it off a tree. That's only by sweet fruit that are geschmack. The shaila of juicing is a different shaila. The second teretz of the Gemara that we discussed is that you're not allowed to use mashka that came out of a fruit because you might squeeze it. Right. So there, since we make carrot juice nowadays, it would apply to carrot. But the other shaila, you're not allowed to use pears that fell off a tree. Look at that. There are shittas who learn that only applies to sweet fruit. That you'd have a geschmack to get another one. So Zok the Gemara, Kuluk Rab Nachman lo yami. Why did anybody not say like Rab Nachman? Rab Nachman had the first shot, a simple shot, was muksa. The chicken was destined to create eggs, so it wasn't a Michael. And now this egg is going to be a Michael, so it's muksa. Why can't everybody agree with Rab Nachman? Because the Gemara had a very good kasha on Rab Nachman. And the kasha that the Gemara had on Rab Nachman was, then why didn't the Mishnah discuss both the chicken and the egg? And that's why they didn't want to learn our Mishnah like Rab Nachman. How about Karabba? Rabba learned al Tachana. Karabba nami lo yamri. Why? Because Tachana leslu. They happen to disagree with this whole new issur that meals on Shabbos and Yom Tov need to be prepared from before Yom Tov. They disagree with that whole shita. So therefore, they didn't want to agree with that pshat. But Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yitzchak, why are they arguing with each other? Rabbi Yosef, my time Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yosef, who said that the gzera of this egg is otu perish anashru. Why didn't he say it's because it's mashkin hayotze min haperes? Amar lach. So Rabbi Yosef exactly what Chaim Tzvi said. Beitza uchla, uperes uchla. If I'm going to aser eggs, I'm going to aser eggs because it's like it's an ochel, something that you eat. The pears I aser because I might pick the pears off the tree, so I'll extend that to eggs as well. Lafuka mashkin lavuchlu. Mashkin is a drink. It's not a food. So it's hard for me to understand why you would extend a gzeira on mashkin to food. Rabbi Yitzchak, my time Elohim Rabbi Yosef. Why didn't Rabbi Yitzchak want to learn Rabbi Yosef that the gzeira is because of pears that fell off a tree that you're not allowed to use? Amalach, I'll tell you why. Because beitza belua, the egg is inside the chicken and it comes out. Similar to mashkin, umashkin balloon. Mashkin are inside the pear and then they come out. So we're making a gzeira the same way you can't use the mashkin that came out from inside the peri, so you shouldn't use the egg that came out from inside the chicken. Let me just finish the sentence. Lafuke Paris, the megala v'kaimu. Paris are always there. And the question is, are you allowed to pull it off the tree or not? I don't think that's so similar, Dr. Biesok, and that's why I didn't want to say that.
Yeah, but mashkin you have to squeeze out with the egg.
Shmuel speaking. 1 second. Right. There's no, well, even if you pull, it's more than that. It's more than, you're asking more. Even if someone would stick his hand into the chicken and pull it out, you're allowed to. There's no issue. It's not a fire. There's an issue to pull a pear off a tree. There is no issue to pull the egg out of a chicken. But we're not answering it because you might pull it out of the chicken. Since we're answering these pears, and since we're answering these mashkin, we're also extending it to eggs. So yes, it is a stretch, but that's the gzera. I'm sorry, David, what were you saying?
I'm saying mashkin you have to squeeze out with the egg; it drops out by itself.
So that's a svara to say they're different. So there's svaras to say they're different. The svaras to say they're the same. Rabbi Yitzchak decided to compare it to mashkin hayotzim, and Rabbi Yosef decided to compare it to perish and ashkin. Okay, so let's see what we have over here. The af Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what did Rabbi Yochanan? Is there logic? We had arguments both ways, but is there a logic to aser an egg, a solid food, because of the mashkin that came out of the pears? Is it logical to compare the egg to the liquid that came out of pears? Chaim Tzvi thought it wasn't logical, but there's other source for carrot. So what does Rabbi Yochanan hold about this? Can I aser an egg otu mashkin shazav? So
I didn't say that it wasn't compared. I just said that it's not the same Gezeira.
I hear.
One Gezeira.
Right. So there's a svar that you could be mechal. You would be able to argue. You can hear why Rabbi Yosef didn't say like Rabbi Yitzchak. So Zok the Gemara, we believe, look the Gemara, that Rabbi Yechon also learns like Rabbi Yitzchak, and he finds it very comparable, an egg to mashkus zov. How do I know that? Because Rabbi Yechon asked a stira between two Rabbi Yehudas, and one Rabbi Yehuda was a solid, one was a mashkin, and Rabbi Yechon felt that you can ask a kasha from one to the next. So if he felt you can ask a kasha from one to the next, obviously he holds like Rabbi Yitzchak that you can compare the two. And now the Gemara gets into the details. Rabbi Yechon Rami Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yechon had a stira in Rabbi Yehuda, and he answered that stira. But the mere fact that he considered it a stira is proof positive that he holds their comparable. Tanan we learn. Ain't seichin as a payers loitzi men mashkin. You're not allowed to squeeze payers on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's on Shabbos. It's a deraisa. On Yom Tov as well. You're not allowed to squeeze out payers. It's a deraisa. But if they oozed out juice on their own, asurin, it'll also be usur. That is the shita of the Tanakama. Rashi says, Gzeira Shema Yisra. It's still a Gzeira that you might do it and you're not allowed to do it. If the reason why you had the grapes in this basket was because you wanted to eat the grapes and you don't want them to ooze juice because if they ooze juice, then they lose juice and you want them to remain juicy. So therefore, you're not happy that they're leaking. You want them to retain their juice. So then they're mutter because we're not worried that you will say, oh, I like this grape juice, I'll squeeze some more grapes. Because to the contrary, you can say, oy vey, the grapes are starting to leak. I don't want that to happen. So therefore, if the reason why you had those grapes served up was because you wanted to eat them, then we're not geyser, and therefore you're allowed to use that mashka. But but if you had these grapes in a basket and you were planning to squeeze them, but you just didn't get to that yet, and some juice oozed out on its own, then ayoytze mehen osir, because then you might be tempted to squeeze the grapes to get more juice out of it. So what do you see from here? At least according to Rabbi Yehuda, Amal kal oichlin Rabbi Yehuda, uchlud afreshu. You see my ikra din, Rabbi Yehuda holds that anything that comes out of the grape is part of the grape. It's part of the grape, meaning we don't look at it like it's a new thing. It's part of the grape. So Rashi, Alma, mitikамar, imla oichlin, hayoytze mutter. You see from here that kol oichlin, anything that was supposed to be eaten, like these grapes, amrinon the davar yoytzemen uchladoversu. You say that anything that came out of something that you're intending to eat, so the juice that came out of these grapes, we say it's food that's separated from the original grape. The ein bechlal gzeres mashkin shazav, and you won't make the gzera of mashkin shazavu on this liquid. Ureminu, frag toisus. Ureminu frag gemara, frag Rabbi Yochanan. But oid amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said something else, and he said as follows: Masna adam al kol kol shal peiros b'yom tov rishon v'oichel b'shem. What happens if a person has peiros that are not masukin? They're tevel and need to be misakin. And the halach is you're not allowed to be misakin peiros on Yom Tov. So what he decided to do is on the first day of Yom Tov, he's going to make a t'nai, and he's going to say, if today is really Yom Tov, I'm not doing anything. But if today is not Yom Tov, then these 6 pairs over here, I want them to be truma on the rest. Now, I can't eat it now because I might be tevel, because I said if today's Yom Tov, I'm not doing anything. I'm just putting these pairs here. But if today's not Yom Tov, then I want it to be hafrash. So I can't do anything yet. Tomorrow I do the same thing. I say if today is choil and yesterday was Yom Tov, now I'm making that fresh. If today is Yom Tov and yesterday was choil, then that fresh from yesterday worked. So on day 2, you for sure covered all your bases, and therefore you'd be allowed to eat the pairs. So mas nadam akol kol shal peiros b'yom tov rishon, and then v'oichel b'sheni, if he does this transaction twice, then after he did it on the second day, he knows it was masuk. Okay, that's not relevant to our kasha, but v'chein beya shenolda b'rishon toichel b'sheni, a beya that was laid on day 1 of Yom Tov may be eaten on day 2 of Yom Tov. Zokt the Gemara, Zokt Rabbi Yochanan, b'sheni in b'rishon loy. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda is not allowing you to eat the egg on the first day of Yom Tov. So he holds that beya shenolda b'Yom Tov is also must be because he holds it is comparable to mashkin hayotzim and peiros. So you see clearly you see clearly from Rabbi Yochanan that he equated the two. He said that if you're not geyser al mashkin shazavu, you should also not be geyser on this egg. And the fact that he says you can't use this egg shows that he is geyser on mashkin shazavu. Umeshani. And Rabbi Yochanan answered, Umeshani Rabbi Yochanan muchalefes hashita. You know what he did? He just flipped around who said what. And this brisa where it says en zeichnas a paris loitz ben mashkin b'miyot masvin asurin, he said that's Rabbi Yehuda. And the second shita that we quoted earlier from Rabbi Yehuda, that im la'oichlon yotz ben mutter, that's according to the Chachamim. So Rabbi Yochanan felt was stark enough of a kasha that he actually changed. He flipped the shitas of Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama. The mere fact that Rabbi Yochanan equated these two cases and considered them equal, and because of that, he had to switch the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda around in the case of Mashkin Shazavu, Shmami no Chataim. So you clearly see that Rabbi Yochanan is in agreement with Rabbi Yitzchak that you would answer an egg that was laid on Shabbos and Yom Tov because of the Gzeira of Mashkin Shazavu. Now we have a stira in Rabbi Yehuda. So there's other ways to answer that stira. Ravina says, and Rashi does, what is Ravina coming to do? Ravina says, no. Rabbi Yochanan had a stira. I don't think there's a stira. I can tell you why the two Rabbi Yehudas are consistent with each other. Because Rabbi Yehuda, of course, Rabbi Yehuda holds that you would be allowed to eat the egg. Rabbi Yehuda holds you're allowed to eat the egg because he says you're not geyser just like he said earlier. Rabbi Yehuda was saying, according to the Rabbanan, I would allow the egg to be eaten even on the first day of Yom Tov. There's no problem. It's not muksa, it's oichel. You Rabbanan, who are geyser by mashkin shazavu, oiduli mihas, at least agree to me, the b'sheni shari, that on the second day of Yom Tov, the egg should be mutter. You know why? Hishtei kedushay say. Because say that each day of Yom Tov is a separate, not one long day, it's two separate days, and therefore the zera from the first day shouldn't apply to the second day. And on that, it's one kedusha, and since it's usher on the first day of Yom Tov, because I am geyser al mashkin shazavu, that isser extends to the second day of Yom Tov as well. Okay, that's a good pshat. Ravina B'Rejavula had another pshat. Amr, he said, you're making an assumption that there's no problem of muksa on this egg. Why? Because the chicken was oimid lachila. And that's why the only possibility to outlaw the eating of this egg was because of mashkin shazavu. And that's why you had a problem. Also forget, the second brayso that we quoted at the bottom, where Rabbi Yehuda holds you cannot eat it on the first day, you could only eat it on the second day, that was speaking because of muksa. It goes back to Rabbi Nachman's father. In fact, the chicken was not oimedis lachila. It was oimedis l'gabel bayim. So you have a muksa problem. Rabbi Yehuda l'tamei, the Islam muksa. And we know Rabbi Yehuda holds of muksa, right? The whole big shadow was Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. That Basil was holding like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds of muksa. So therefore, it's tam not a kasha, because the case of the egg is a completely different case and has nothing to do with mashkin shazah. Zok the Gemara Mesa. Now the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on some of the earlier pshatim. So let's just review. We had four pshatim. We had Rabbi Nachman that was a muksa. We had Rabbah that it was the deraisa of hachana. We had Rabbi Yosef that it was a gzeira atu perish shenashru, and we had Rabbi Yitzchak who said it was a gzeira atu mayim that atu may perish that came out of the may perish by themselves. Right? Speak up so you can.
Are you allowed to put wood into a fire on Yom Tov?
Are you allowed to add wood to a fire on Yom Tov? Yes, you are.
Right?
We're actually going to discuss that today.
So if you have a chair, right? In those days, the chair was made out of piece of wood, right? Now the chair is not oimed for firewood.
Correct.
Right? The chair is oimed as a chair. The
Correct.
case.
Correct.
Is the chair muktzah?
No, of course not.
No muktzah. So why do we have a chicken that's muktzah? What is it about the chicken?
Oh, very good. If you have a chair and the chair breaks, you're not allowed to use that as firewood. No, because it was hooked for something else. It wasn't firewood. If a chair breaks on Shabbos, you're not allowed to use that for firewood.
You're not allowed to break up, and you're allowed to do it.
We learned that yesterday on base. Look at the top of base on base. If you have a beam in your house that broke, we learned that at the top of base on base. If you have a beam in your house that broke, you're not allowed to use that for firewood. Prepared firewood. Not Shabbos, Yom Tov. Yeah, Yom Tov. Yeah, sure. You're allowed to use firewood.
And you can't, and so for sure you can't break a chair.
So it's even though the chicken that's Bayim might not be muksa, you can't use it, but you can't eat it because it's not hooks for eating.
As long as it, so therefore, so as long as it's hooked, not hooked, but machaven for slaughter, then you can slaughter it.
Correct. On Yom Tov, that's right. Okay, so let's see the Gemara here. So the Gemara, now that we have 4 shittas, the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on some of the shittas, and let's see who. Echad Beita, the Brisa says as follows: Echad Beita shenolda b'Shabbos. Say an egg that was laid on Shabbos. V'echad Beita shenolda b'Yom Tov, or an egg that was laid on Yom Tov. Ein metalton loisa. It's muksa, so you can't move it around. Loy lechases basakli. You can't use it. Never mind to eat. It's muksa even to move around. So you can't cover a bottle with it. You can't use it as a bottle stopper. You can't use it to put underneath your bed to hold up your bedpost. So you're going to ask me, it's going to crush. The Akiva told us a couple of days ago, and the Chaim as well, that an egg can hold 60 pounds, right? An egg in the right position, of course. It can support 160 pounds. He said 160 pounds. And Chaim Tzvi said over yesterday from Victor Miller, that's how, that the egg is such an unbelievable thing. Because they're going to have to make it very strong so that it can withstand pressure of 160 pounds. And the reason why I have to make it because the pressure that's exerted upon it when the chicken is pushing it out is that strong that if the eggshell couldn't withstand 160 pounds, it would shatter. But on the other hand, it has to be weak enough for the little chicklet inside it to peck his way out. So the Rebbeinu Shem's engineering is impeccable. Because it's strong enough not to crush, but it's weak enough to allow the chicken to pick his way out.
That's a great pun, Yosy. Impeccable. Okay.
Actually, you both have to make it peccable. But so I love as a kli, but you're allowed to cover it over with a kleli, the shvil to light the shaber, so that it shouldn't break. Now, this in and of itself is a chiddush. So Rashi says koifal of zakli. So Rashi says here to the side, the avagav the enni tell us, even though you're not allowed to move the egg because the egg is muksa, metaltal zakli letzarcha. You're allowed to be metaltal a keli that's not muksa on behalf of an egg that is muksa. This will be a raya against Rabbi Yitzchak. The Omar ain't kli nital ela davar hanital b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to move even a davar that's not muksa if it's on behalf of something that is muksa. And Rabbi Yitzchak, Rashi tells us, how does he explain this Mishnah? How could you move a keli around if he holds you're not allowed to move a keli on behalf of something that's muksa? You needed to place it a keli, so you were moving the keli anyway, which opens up a huge shaila. So let's look at the top toisus. There's a fascinating toisus that leads to a fascinating shaila. Here's Rashi. Rashi told us, Rashi reported that they asked the kasha on their bits with this brisa. The Amar ain't clean nittel elo davar nittel who tiritz b'tzarachlam kodim. And your Yitzchak answered the reason why the brisa there says that you're allowed to take a keli and cover the egg with it because you had to pick up the keli anyway because it was tzarachlam kodim. Once you have it in your hand, you can put it on top of the egg. That's the chiddush you learn from here. So the kaim along the davar shemalach tele iser aser eino elo davka she'eino tzarach kufa elo tzarach kodim. Zogt Toshvis, the fact that Rabbi Yitzchak said that even though it's you weren't allowed to carry it in davar of muksa, but l'tzarech makayim you were, you're allowed. So technically, you weren't allowed to lift up this bowl to cover the egg with it because you're not allowed to move it l'tzarech the egg. But if you had to lift up the egg anyway, l'tzarech makayim you'd be allowed to. Av l'tzarech gufay, l'tzarech makayim shari. And here's the bombshell chiddush: the imhischel talto b'shvil shetzarech l'gufay aylim kaymay. Once you picked up muksa, because you needed to move it over, you needed its place, or you needed the muksa for something else, now mutter la'lichai afilu b'chedron. You're allowed to put it wherever you want. Because over here, the chazina hacha, the hoil v'tzarchim kaimer l'go b'kli kafel beitza. Maybe if you need to move the keli, because you need its place, you pick it up and you move it right down. Who said you could walk across the room? Who said you could walk across the house? Who said you could walk across the yard and place it wherever you want it to be? So from this Gemara, you see a huge chiddush according to your mitzvah, that if you have a heter to pick up muksa, once you pick them, even though the reason for your heter is no longer applicable, you're allowed to take it to wherever you want. So once you pick up muksa, you're allowed to take it wherever you want. Where there's a big shaila is, what if you picked up muksa wrongfully by mistake? You didn't know the lacha, you picked up muksa. Now you have muksa in your hand. Do you also have that leeway to be able to go wherever you want? Or that you have to put on right away? So that's a big machloikis. The Magen Avraham holds you're allowed to, and the Gra holds you're not allowed to. There's actually a big machloikis achroinim if you picked up the muksa wrongfully, if you're allowed to put it wherever you want. There's also a shaila of what type of muksa it is. For instance, where the shaila comes out was a moil has his special knife. His special knife is muksa machmas chasar kis, which is one of the severe types of muksas. A klisha malach lisser isn't so severe because it's mutter l'tzorach kufa or l'tzorach mekaymoy. But a mila knife is a very, very chomer de muksa. It's muksa machmas chasar kis. Doesn't want to get damaged. After he does the bris, is he allowed to wash the knife off and put it away where he wants, or must he put it right down? So the Vilna Gaon brings a right from a Gemara. I don't remember the details. That Tipalt, he's doing it tzorach a mitzvah. There's a special heter why he's allowed. But vice the chois from the Vilna Gaon is medayik that if you picked up something that was usher, you would not be allowed to move it anywhere. You'd have to put it right down. But the Magen Avraham holds, even if you picked it up wrongfully, you would be allowed to put it wherever you want.
The Miles knife Shiloh sounds very much like there's an Atzola guy allowed to drive back. If you don't let the Miles put away his knife, he's not going to go do a bris on Shabbos.
Well, that's much more cooler, really, because the Atzola guys are even allowed to do a malacha to get back, aren't they? Are they allowed to? No, they're not. They're only allowed to sit in the car. And it is similar. Yeah, if the moil can't protect his knife, he might not. And depending on the kids in shul, it might be a sekonos nefashos to leave the knife there anyway. If they throw tissue boxes off Tetzes Noshim, who knows what they would be doing with knives? Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayter. So this was a very interesting shayla.
Shmuel said, Shmuel's afraid.
Why not? It was a mitzvah deraisa. I'm not a moil, but I want to do or not. Okay, so let's see the Gemara Vayter. We're running late, but these are very important Gemaras. So let's move on. So the Gemara has a kasha. We have a beya, and we say the beya is going to be aser emital b'yom tov not b'shabbos. And then it goes on and says sveika asur. A suffix is aser. What does it mean? What is this suffix that we're talking about? So Rashi says, for right now, we're going to assume that the suffix is, if it was a suffix, if the egg was laid on Shabbos, Yom Tov, or maybe it was B'choil. So you see an egg, and you weren't sure, hey, was this here Erev Yom Tov, or was it not Erev Yom Tov? If it's a suffix, it's going to be us. Now, in this Arabella, what if this egg got mixed in with 1,000 other eggs? Kul and Asuris, they're all going to be us. So let's think about this. Bishlema Rabba. If you don't like Rabba, the Amr Mishum Achana, according to Rabbi, it's a deraisa. Achana was a deraisa, right? The Gemara said that you learn the Achana from Pasuk, it's Israel deraisa. So if it's an Israel deraisa, I understand why, if it's a suffix, if this was laid on Yom Tov or not, have a sveka deraisa, because sveka deraisa luchum. So then it would make sense why the Bride says it's also. But according to Rabbi Yosef, who learned that it was a gzeira of Perish and Oshri, and according to Rabbi Yitzchak, that it was a gzeira because of Maim Shazovu, the Amr Mishum gzeira sveka derabanani, because sveka derabanan l'kula. How could you explain why the Mishnah says that there's a suffix here? It's also it's a suffix derabanan. Who was obviously omitted from this equation? Reb Nachman. We discussed Reb Yitzchak. We know is derabanan. Reb Yosef is derabanan. Rab is deraisa. What about Reb Nachman? So let's look. So let's slide over to the side.
He was up. Reb Nachman was upslug.
Not if you ask him.
He had the Gemara had a kasha and he never answered it.
But it doesn't mean he slugged himself. He still stands by his shot. Gemara quoted him. So I have at the side of my Gemara here on the margin. I'm not sure if what everybody has in their Gemara, but on the side margin, quoting from the Tosfos Yeshonim, I have in my margin as follows. Let me see if I can get it to focus. Aval Rab Nachman loy porach. The Gemara is not asking on Rab Nachman. The muksa chamira of a kendai rice. Muksa is considered a very serious, even though it's Rabbanon, it's a very serious Rabbanon, and it's kendai rice. And therefore, the Gemara would understand, according to Rab Nachman, why it would be Sveika Lisua. So only according to Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yosef, it was mamish a regular Gzeir D'Rabbanan. There, the Gemara challenges why would it be Aser D'Rabbanan. Now, this teretz, I hope David is still here. He is, because David is going to love this teretz. And for the Gemara, Seifa, where it says V'sveika Asura, it's talking about also in the Suffolk Treifa. When we mean if it's a Suffolk, if this egg is from a Treifa chicken, that's the Shiloh over here. And it's so obvious when you read the Brisa that when it says Sveika Asura, it's not speaking about the same Shiloh that we've been discussing about it being Mel and Yom Tov. Of course, it's speaking about a Suffolk Treifa. It's like it's so obvious.
I'm not crazy about that Taisvus Yashin that you just read. Yeah, that doesn't make. What do you mean? Is there like different levels of the Rabbanans that some are more serious, some are less serious? I mean, who decides? I mean, how do we suddenly that came out of nowhere? That this is a serious Rabbanan, and then there's not so serious takanas,
I hear, but I think it quotes the Gemara and Chavdal Beis shows a similar thing. So maybe when we get there, we'll try to remember to focus on it and to see how that applies to muksa. But apparently there are Rabbanans that are more severe.
So there's one thing you should know, that if muksa would somehow be more makel, the entire Shabbos could be destroyed in 2020 in modern days.
Well,
right?
that's what the Mishnah brings down. That's what the Rishonim bring down. That's one of the reasons for this in muksa, because technically muksa can undo the whole Shabbos. Right. So maybe that's why it's severe.
But I have another reason why the seifa could be referring to the egg, and we should answer it even though it's in a rabbanon.
Why?
Because in a chicken coop, an egg is always getting lost. Meaning the whole.
So Safek Rabbanon Kula, so it should always be mutter.
No, but we say that it's awesome.
If you know, then there's a there. If you don't know, it's Safek Rabbanon Kula.
So you can look at it that way.
So let's see the Gemara bite. So the Gemara, it's speaking about a Safek Treifa. In fact, the Gemara, if it's speaking about a Safek Treifa, then I got another problem. Ihachi Ema Seifa. What does it say right after that? If you take this egg, and obviously now you're talking about a Safek Treifa here, and there was this Avra Ba'elef Kul Masuras, it's going to answer all of the other eggs. Why in the world would it answer all the eggs? Why would something not be bottled? We know every Israel is bottled right, so this egg should be bottled too. But there's a rule of davar sheyesh lo matirin is not bottled right. A davar sheyesh lo matirin is not bottled right. That's a whole lump of suga into itself that maybe we'll talk about tomorrow. But a davar sheyesh lo matirin is not bottled. So a davar sheyesh lo matirin is an egg on the first day of Yom Tov that it's also today, but you can eat it tomorrow. So if we're speaking about Bishlam is Safek Yom Tov, Safek Chol, if you're going to learn like Rabbah, that the reason why this egg was Asr Misafek is because of the Isser of Achana, but it's going to be mutter tomorrow, then have a Davar Sheish Lamatirin. This egg is going to be mutter tomorrow. The Chol Davar Sheish Lamatirin, Afilu Belef Lebot. And therefore, it makes sense to say for the Mishnah or the Brisa why it's not bottled. Eliyam is Safek Treifa. If you're such a Safek Treifa, which is Asr forever, Davar Shein Lamatirin. You could never be matter a Treifa. And therefore, it's bottled right now, but the bottle baruba. So yes, you want to solve your problem of why Suffolk is usher by saying it's talking about a treifa, but it opens up a whole bigger problem when you get to the next line of the Brisa, which says that it's not bottle afilu bel. So now we're stuck.
I don't even understand the logic of davar sheyesh le'matirin is not going to be
bottle.
Yeah, why is that?
So that's a whole big lumdus. We're running very late. But I'll just tell you briefly, and we'll get into the lumdus later. There's actually a machlokes rishonim why a davar she'ein le'matirin, sheyesh le'matirin is not bottle. Rashi says the most simple, logical thing. Rashi says, I'm looking at Rashi, the Elef loy bottle. The Afagav the Midirais Achad bottle. The Chsiv Acharab and Lahatois. Acham Rabbanon. Rabbanon were machar by davar sheyesh le'matirin. However, yesh le'matirin lachazman lo yichlenu be'isser al yidei bittul. If you can eat it tomorrow, beheter, why eat it today be'isser? Which seems, which is a chiddush Rashi, because Rashi is saying that bittul b'roiv is not mevatel the isser. The isser is still there. We're just making and letting you eat it. Right? So then why do it? Why rely on it? Wait till tomorrow. There are those who learn that davar sheyesh le'matirin means, since it's a davar sheyesh le'matirin, so then it's exactly the same as the thing that's mutter. Min b'mina le'batel. So there are Rishonim who learn that the reason why davar sheyesh le'matirin is mutter is because min b'mina le'batel. The nafkamina will be and I'll get to it later. I don't want to go too far because I'm going to get carried away. It's such a geschmack and stickle. The whole shear today that I was saying, I was excited to get this out of my stomach. This whole stickle of lumdus and double shit, I have to hold it tomorrow. That's right. I'm trying to get the egg out. If you want to suggest another reason why it's not bottle, not because of double shit material, because treifa is always also, but maybe it's because a beitza is a choshev zak. It's an individual item, and that's why it's not bottle. So it depends on how choshev something has to be before we say that it's not bottle because of a dover choshev. If you learn that any item that sometimes you sell it by account, in other words, you can have an egg that you could sell by the pound, or you can have an egg that you could sell individually. Since it's possible sometimes you sell this item individually and you count it out each item separately, then and you hold that's enough to be choshev, then I would understand why this is not bottle. But according to the Mandamar who holds that the only type of things that are not bottle are so super choshev that you'll never ever sell them by the pound, you only sell them one at a time, those are the only items that would not be bottle, Michael and Mamer, because we know eggs are items that sometimes you sell by the pound, sometimes you sell them individually. But because of that, according to one Mandamar, it's not choshev enough, and therefore it should be bottle. So according to that Mandamar, what are you going to do? Where do you see this machlokes as to how choshev something has to be before you say it cannot be bottle? Because we had a case as follows: Mishoyloi Chavile Tilson Shal Klayakerem. He had bundles of some type of beans that were Klayakerem, which are also bano, and they have to be burned. Yidlachu, you must burn them. Rashi says because it says tukdash, and we dash in tukad ba'esh. They have to be burned. Klayakerem must be burned. What happens if the Klayakerem was misarvu ba'acheres? You mix them into one bundle into another bundle, then kulam yidlachu. It infects everything. They're never going to be bottled. Everything that's burned. Divrei Meir. Yalu ba'achas. They'll be bottled in 200. If you have 200 heter, connected them, then the Klayakerem will be bottled. Now, why did your mayor hold that they're never ever bottled? So your mayor Omer esh shedakai limnois mekadesh. Since it's something that you count, it's a chosh of a thing. It's counted. It's not sold by the pound. It will never ever be bottled. The Chachamim say no. Even something that you count individually is still not choshev enough to say that it's not bottled. There's only 6 items that are so super choshev that they're not bottled in 100. Eloshisha dvarim bavad. Shiva, there's 7 things. What are these very choshev things that are never ever going to be bottled? It goes a ferach, which means nuts from a place called ferach, or might also mean nuts that have a softer shell so they're easier to eat. Okay, urimoine badan. See, David, I was referring when I started.
I can't say nuts, right?
Yeah, that's right. Urimoine badan, or urimoine from badan, or chaviyah sumas, a sealed barrel of wine is a davar choshev. The chelfai trading, their leaves from a trading plant. I'm not sure what these are. Kalchet kruv are kruv, I think is cabbage, the stems of a cabbage. Udalash yivanis, these are very choshev things. They're never bought. Abakiva moisef av kikrosh balbais, even loaves of bread that a balbais made are choshev. They're never bought. So haroyal arla, out of this list of items that we said that are not bottled, the ones that could become arla are arla, and that's the discussion why they wouldn't be bottled. Because what shaila are they not bottled? What's wrong with them that we not need to be bottled them? So some of these items could be are things that grow on trees, and therefore they could possibly have a problem of arla. And haroyal klayakerem, and certain species over here might be klayakerem, and that's why they're not allowed to be used. And we learned on this brisa. Rabbi Yochanan said that the only things that are choshev that are not bottled, according to the Chachamim, is if it's something that's only counted, it's never ever sold in a bunch. Anything that you sometimes count, even though sometimes you sell it in bulk, that's also choshev enough not to be bottled. So to finish up the question the Gemara asked earlier, if you hold like Shimon ben Lakish, then you can make an argument why these eggs aren't bottled. Because these eggs sometimes are counted, even though they're not always counted, but since sometimes they're counted, that's enough to make them choshev, and that's why they're not bottled, even though they're treif. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, that the only things that aren't bottled are only things that you only count, that you never sell in bulk. How are you going to understand if you learn that the brisa above is speaking about eggs that are from a treif chicken? How are you going to explain why they're not bottled in Elef? And we'll stop over here. Okay. And Mishram, tomorrow, remind me tomorrow to go through the sugya of Dover Shesla material. It's such a fascinating, beautiful sugya that has nafkamina halacha l'maisa. So it's very smart.
But you're gonna learn an hour before Mincha tomorrow?